Welcome to Speakernomics, the official podcast of the National Speakers Association. I'm Kenneth Kinney, but friends call me Shark. And like you, I'm a professional speaker and I love listening to Speakernomics. Speakernomics is a professional speaker show that will help you thrive and grow a speaking business so you too can change the world. One keynote session, workshop, and speech at a time. And on this episode, we welcome Amanda Gore. Don't know Amanda? Well, she is an author, a CSP, a CPA Hall of Fame speaker on joy, leadership, sales, communication, positive workplaces, and dealing with change. Amanda, welcome to Speakernomics. Aussie, Aussie, Aussie. Oi, oi, oi. How are you today?
What a guy. You do great research. Thanks, Shark. Of course,
Absolutely.
we have a great tie. You know, you love sharks. I'm from Australia.
It's pretty good diving.
Yeah.
Now, to all my speaking friends, what is your competitive advantage as a speaker? Is it your stagecraft, your slides, your research, or even your interesting clothes or crazy shoes? What is it after all if it's not the joy you create in the people watching you? And are you focused on creating the lasting connection to joy that allows them to feel good about themselves and change their attitudes and behaviors? If you want your audience to be engaged, motivated, and equipped with actionable tools they'll actually use, joy may just be the competitive advantage that you need. And before we jump in, make sure to go to speakernomics.com. That's where you can find the tips, insights, and knowledge to help you become a better speaker, build a better business, and get paid to speak. Amanda, let's dive in. Number one, what do you do to create a joyful experience for a crowd, big or small? And what's the advice you would give to other speakers who are trying to create just that?
Well, I wish I could own this answer, but my very first mentor, Ron Tacky, whom I met in Australia, gave me this piece of advice that has helped me, I'm sure, as a foundation in my career. And he's still one of the best speakers I've ever seen. He's dead now, but he was one of the best speakers I've ever seen. Ron could take a crowd up, down, up, down, up, down, and shoot them through the ceiling at the end of it. And he told me, have fun. Because if you have fun, they'll have fun. And that, you know, that's how he told it to me. And in my consequent years of study and research, if you think about the quantum field, that's why it works. Because we're all connected all the time in a field. And if you're aware of that as a speaker, I also studied Qigong and became a Qigong teacher for years. And for those of you who don't know, it's a Chinese form of, philosophy of exercise. But we talk a lot about the Qi field, which really means the quantum field. And before you do a class, you're taught to set the field. And so that's another part of it. So the first is to have fun. And the problem is when there's a set speech, it's, if you weave fun in, how fun is that really? And how spontaneous is it? Because the energy and the spontaneity that you bring to an event, if you're reading the audience, something will happen and you can make it fun. And you're responding in the moment, in the field. And one of the other things, I'll mention this probably at Influence, is Ralph Waldo Emerson's quote, "Who you are shouts so loudly I can't hear what you say." And that shines out when you're on stage. And that's part of how you create the joyful experience. And of course, there's going to be speakers listening who are saying, well, I speak on AI, or I speak on, some dull subject according to other people, not to you, of course, because you're the speaker speaking about it. But I find it doesn't matter how profound the content is. If you mingle it with fun and interaction, that makes an experience in which, so it's got kind of like a crucible in which people can alchemize. If you give them the right safe space in which they can absorb your messages and then kind of integrate them in a nanosecond, that's truly an influential speaker.
Yeah, and you think about with all jobs, people do the same job day to day in whatever field. And if you have a set speech, even if you're an actor and you're doing the same thing over and over again, it's very easy to internalize it, make it about you and how you do it, as opposed to having fun with it and making it about them. So love every bit of that. So then what is your advice for balancing edutainment? I know you're a motivational business speaker as well, but regardless of how much fun and joy a speaker can bring, a lot of meeting planners and corporate folks want some meat on the bone, if you will, without just a funny fork and plate. They want the information that they need to help their teams progress and grow and so forth. You were even voted not that long ago with an Educator of the Year award. So doing that is an interesting balance.
Well, again, and I think I've refined this in the last 3 or 4 years. It's a question of putting in really profound content and then breaking the state with a bit of humor or interactivity or getting them to do something with each other. Because if you make it, and it's interesting, Shark, because I used to be, in my mind, much, much funnier. People were rolling around the floor laughing the whole time in my first, 20 years probably. And they loved that. And I still felt like there were really important messages in between. And I had a client come back yesterday. I was talking to them, and I must have spoken to this group, 15 years ago maybe. And the guy quoted me 2 or 3 things that I had said back then that he said he uses every day. So it's how you package it, and it's that you can have really profound stuff. So I don't think I'm so funny now, but I have audiences still saying to me, "You were so funny." And I go, "Was I?" And so somehow I found a way to non-verbally and verbally deliver really profound, like soul-searching information about who you really are and what's driving you and how you're feeling. And then you break the state, because if you keep them at that intense level all the time, they're overwhelmed and they can't take it all in. But if you're up and down like that, it's a bit like Ron. You take them on an emotional high, then serious, then emotional high, then serious. So for me, that's the way I do the edutainment. So I find one specific thing that I probably won't get time to talk about at Influence is to have a transition statement going from one concept to the next. So I have little boxes down the side of a page, and a transition statement can be, you're talking about, gosh, the pollen's dreadful right now, isn't it? Which reminds me, when you go diving, there is absolutely no correlation between diving and pollen. But if you say something as a transition statement, like, which reminds me, oh, wait, I just thought of something. And then, so they're very simple phrases, but you can transition from a bit of comedy or laughter or a story and then go back into the profound content or concept, and then give them another break in a slightly different way. Maybe not funny, maybe it's an interaction or some activity.
You told me once that you don't necessarily have set speeches. What do you mean by that? And what do you do to rehearse so that you still know what to convey to that audience? There's got to be a lot of parts that you've done a lot of times over and over, but it's still you tweak and improvise some and so forth.
Well, again, I have to quote Ron, because I don't like to take, concepts.
Rest in peace, Ron.
People. So Ron wouldn't let me rehearse. And he was the one that kind of set me off. I have a framework, and I know I'm probably going to upset a lot of people by saying I don't have a set speech, and I really don't, I don't coach set speeches. You've obviously got to have content that's appropriate, relevant, up to date, that flows, that is something that people want to learn. So there's no question about that. The concept of the speech that you rehearse, it's always the same opening. It's all, you pause in the same place, you cry in the same place, those sorts of things. It's not authentic. After you've done it 20 times, it's a bit like you mentioned earlier, acting. If you're doing the same role, well, actors, I guess they do the same role, but they assume the personality and they feel into it. But speakers are not actors. if you think of yourself as an actor, then I don't think you're a speaker doing a presentation. For me, a speaker is engaged in a non-verbal conversation with the audience. And if you have a speech, and so you might as well have a piece of paper between you and me, because there's my speech, and it doesn't matter who I'm delivering it to, they're getting my speech. And they're getting all the bits and pieces that I've carefully crafted, and timing and all that sort of stuff. And you do have to be aware of that. But Ron used to say to me, stop memorizing, but internalize. And what I took with that, so the way I work is that I have boxes down the left-hand side of a page. Left? Yes. And then off each box, I have 3 little sticks that come. So there's the main concept, then there's the sub-concepts. And when I was preparing in my earlier days for a new presentation, I'd have the boxes, I'd write out the transition statements, I'd have columns where I'd put content, then the activity. So I'd have the concepts, the content, and then the activity that I would attach to that piece of content to make it stick. And that activity could be just looking at each other, turning to the person next to you. It could be a funny comment. It could be some activity where I had them stand up and do something, but it was something. And then what I would do, I would read that before I went to bed at night. So it was in my subconscious. Then I would wake up in the morning, and the first thing I'd do is in my mind, go through it. Actually, I would do this the night before. I would read it, close my eyes, and go through it internally, rehearse how I was going to do it. And when I forgot a transition statement or something, then I would open my eyes, look at it, and remind myself. And I would do the same thing in the morning. Then I would do it again, and maybe an hour before I was going to speak. And then I would put it aside. And I would focus on the room and the people in the room and the energy in the room. And then I would engage with that when I got up on stage. It's like I had an opening, I knew what I was going to do, and I had the closing. And I have a variety of those. So I would pick the right opening. I might have picked a particular opening, and then when I experienced the crowd, I go, no, I think I'm going to change that. Or when I listened to what was going on before. And actually that ties back to something I think professional speakers don't just fly in an hour before your presentation and get there 2 minutes before and stress the meeting planner to death. I always come at least 24 hours early, sometimes earlier, and I like to sit in the event to get a feel for the event and what they're already talking about. And I will tie some of my content into what they've already heard. And I'll say, like Brian said yesterday, or something like that, because then they think I'm part of their event. I haven't just swanned in, gone blah, and swanned out again. Now I distracted myself. So back to where I was practicing. So I internalize that. I make sure I've got the content fairly set, and then I let it go. And I go on stage and I will interact with the group. I'll have this non-verbal conversation, and it usually flows very well. Sometimes, and particularly in the last 2 or 3 years, I've noticed I can't prepare as well. I certainly do prepare, and I've got a rough outline of the content based on what the client wants. But often these days, I don't even know how I'm going to start until I walk up on stage, because I listen to how they introduce me. Sometimes I'll interrupt them. I just go, oh, don't go on with all that, because it's so boring. I haven't done anything exciting. I don't go diving with sharks. I haven't had any major life experiences. So that's why I prefer not to have a set speech or teach people that, because if you're doing your speech, we were talking about that, weren't we?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank goodness, I distracted myself so much. See? Now, that's a bit about the authenticity and vulnerability. I could pretend that I'm right on top of things, but I've rabbited on for so long with this answer. I kind of lost thought.
No, I think of the same way as, an actor doesn't have the ability to skip a section necessarily based on the way the audience reacts. I did stand up years ago, wasn't any good at it, or I'd probably still be doing it. But you're going to change a set based on where you see jokes falling flat,
Yeah.
things like that. And a lot of it's the same way. And I'm more of a, I mean, there are plenty of speeches that I have memorized that I do a lot, but I'm also consider myself sort of a bullet point speaker. Try to memorize a framework, and then depending on how the audience reacts,
Yeah.
lean into one a little bit more than the other.
Perfect. And I always have hundreds of chunks of information, which I mix
Exactly.
and match based on what the client wants, and then I mix and match it again based on the audience. But it's and I will talk about this at Influence. Michael Grinder, my other major mentor, who's the world's leading authority on nonverbal communication, in my opinion, teaches the difference between the content and the process. And you've got to know your content. It's like a teeter-totter, I think you call it here. We call it seesaw. Michael says, if you don't know your content, you can't do the process because the teeter-totter breaks. So you have to know your content so you can focus on the process. But to know the content means that you're an expert on your content. I remember a million years ago when I started speaking, people would say, well, I want to be a speaker. What's a hot topic? And I'd look at them and I'd go, well, what are you an expert at? Because you've got to know your content. If you've got a set speech and you're delivering that set speech and someone in the audience puts you off, what happens? So I'll just leave you with that. You got no flexibility, adaptability, and it knocks you off and your state is out of whack. And as soon as your internal state's out of whack, you lose the audience. You're disconnected from them.
Considering that you've lived on the other side of the globe, and then now you're back stateside, what's your advice on how to maintain relationships with the people that hire you over a longer career, especially when you might have been 10,000 miles away for quite a few years when you were living in Australia versus here, and vice versa?
Well, I built really strong relationships when I lived here for about 10 years. And I was all the things we talked about. I was authentic. I was real. I remember Washington Speakers Bureau asked me early on, very early after I got here, would I go exclusive? And I said to Bernie at the time, honestly, Bernie, I've just been taken to the cleaners in Australia. I have no money. I can't afford to be exclusive. I need all the work I can get. And he was spectacular. He totally understood, and we've maintained a relationship from that time. So the authenticity, the being real, the being transparent, delivering, keeping them posted about what goes on, always referring jobs back to them if it comes. And we use e-speakers, so we can always track who booked me for that particular company. If two bureaus came with the same job, I would tell both of them, this is what's happening. We were just honest and upfront, so they trusted me. And I didn't go around reducing my fee for anyone and not telling bureaus. And first of all, I was honest and had integrity, and I had ethics. Then I would stay in touch with them anyway. So if I wrote something new but I don't know, in many ways, I think I just go back to being blessed. They remembered me. But maybe that goes back to you delivering 150% every time you deliver. So the clients are thrilled. You're easy to work with. The meeting planners love working with you. And then people remember you and they go from one spot to, and then having awesome content that's useful in people's lives. I suppose those are the sorts of things that continue the relationships you have, not just with bureaus, but with clients and with people in the audience who leave that company and then go to another company and invite you into that.
Now for a little speaking trivia. According to the 2024 Speaking Industry Benchmark Report by AAE, the biggest priority for meeting planners when booking a speaker is... Back with the answer in just a moment. Before we jump back to the show, here's a moment with keynote speaker, author, CSP, and NSA member, Tony Chapman.
Tony, what does being part of NSA mean to you in your speaking business?
To be a professional speaker, you have to have both a great business and be a great speaker. And NSA has done both. I can say honestly, my understanding of the business of speaking has elevated in such a way that you can see it in my fees and my yearly revenue. I would say my understanding of the craft, though, is fascinating. It's not just what's taught, it's observing excellent speakers and understanding there's not a way, there's multiple ways to be great. If you can fit that into who you are, it's amazing, but you can see it within the community of NSA.
And here's the answer. According to the 2024 Speaking Industry Benchmark Report by AAE, the biggest priority for meeting planners when booking a speaker is audience engagement. And now, back to the show. So a question I want to ask you from a previous guest. When you weren't able to give 150% that one time, what's one of the craziest experiences? Tell us the story where it all fell apart.
I hate these questions. I don't know why people love misery and horrible things that have happened to others. But, my memory's not that great. I don't know. I'd like to think I live in the present, but I don't think I do terribly well, but I'm working on it. I can't remember that much. I mean, I usually have such a great time. I love being on stage. It's a calling, really. It's not just being on stage. So the only thing that I can think of that was the night I decided I would never do another after dinner was at the Greenbrier in, somewhere, Carolinas, I think. And it was maybe 600 men who'd been playing golf all day. It was an incentive conference, and they'd been drinking all day. And I was after the main course, not even before the main course, which I would insist on if anybody ever asked me to do a dinner and I agreed to it. And they were so drunk. And I stood on stage, and I'm not a comedian. People say I should be, but I could never do comedy. And I was trying to deliver useful content with humor, and it just did not work. And so I got off the stage as quickly as I could. I said to the organizers, I'm happy to refund you, but this crowd is not ready for this. And honestly, for most after dinners, people don't want content. They want to network. They want to laugh. They want comedians. If you're going to use anybody serious, they have to go at the beginning before people start drinking too much and set the scene for the rest of the dinner. So that was my tortuous event that I just was horrible. So is everybody happy now? You get to hear a horrible experience.
Yeah. I was going to say I'll drink to that. So
yeah. Well, I learned out of it, and I think that's the important part. And what I learned out of it was I'm not an after-dinner comedian, and I won't do that again. And I knew it before I went on stage. In fact, I negotiated with the planners. I said, look, this is not going to work. I'm happy to give you the money back, but they wanted me to go. So I gave it my best. And it was not a pleasant experience for me. And I got some nice comments afterwards, but there were a lot of drunk people there.
Sure. Well, Amanda, what is a question that you would like to ask a future guest on this show?
I came up with, what's the real reason you wanted to be a speaker? Because when I coach people, that's the first question I ask. That goes to the root of everything. Be really honest if you're asking yourself this question. Be really honest with the reason you want to be a speaker. I didn't even know you could be a speaker. I was a physical therapist in ergonomics and occupational health, and I'd written a couple of books, and someone asked me to speak at a conference that in my memory is like 12 people, but it must have been bigger because Ron was the MC there, Ron Tacky. And when I finished my presentation, he said to me, you should be a speaker. And I said, what's a speaker? I didn't know. I was a founding member of NSA in Australia. It was so long ago. But what I knew was that I had a calling for teaching. And I did a lot of training in my job, and I loved it. And so he helped me transition from that. And my passion was wellness at the time. And I was just so passionate. Actually, this is a relevant piece too, if it's not too long. I was so passionate that people didn't have to be in pain, and they could stay well if they did easy things. So one day he said to me, "Stop being a missionary." And I went, "I'm not a missionary." "What do you mean missionary?" "I am not a missionary." Well, of course, it took me a couple of years, but I realized he was right. I was shoving this information down people's throats because I was so passionate about if they did this, they could, have, I'm 70. I got a body that works perfectly. I don't have aches or pains. I'm in great shape. I have more energy than most 30-year-olds. And that's what I knew that. I wasn't 70 back then. But what I learned from that was to create a safe space in which people can absorb the degustation plate that I'm giving them with all sorts of different bits and pieces on it, and they can take the ones that work for them or nothing. So really look at the reason you're a speaker. For me, it was a calling, and it's continued to be a calling.
Excellent. Well, then let's do a quick recap then based on Amanda's joyful advice. Number one, it doesn't matter how profound the content is, create an experience of joy. Give them the right space to enjoy it and absorb it. Number two, have really profound content, but make it about them and inject fun and humor and engagement. It's how you package it. And make sure to use transition statements between content. Make sure your phrases help your stories relate and connect to one another. Number three, she doesn't rehearse, but she does recommend a framework. Speakers aren't actors. For her, it's being engaged non-verbally with an audience, and that perspective changes with every group. She said as she learned it, stop memorizing and start internalizing. I think of it as bullet points more than memorizing a speech, but one way isn't better or worse. It's what works best for you. Just know your content. Amanda, I'm looking forward to seeing you at Influence. Any last closing thoughts before we speak ourselves off this stage?
Yeah, I would just like to thank you, Shark, for the amount of work that you do for this. Those of you who are listening, you have no idea some of the stuff Shark was telling me before we got on the show. This man works so hard for you, and he pulls together, it takes enormous numbers of hours to do all the stuff that he's doing with such a great heart and such passion. So I don't know if you can make comments or anything with the podcast, but make sure that you feel deep gratitude for Shark and what he's doing, and let him know in some way. And I, for one, am very, very grateful. Thank you for being willing to put all that work into helping all of us be better speakers.
Thank you. It's an honor to serve. Friends, make sure to join us at Speakernomics.com and let your voice be heard. I'm Kenneth Kinney, your host of the National Speakers Association's podcast, Speakernomics, and this has been another fantastic episode of the show. Thank you, Amanda, for your service to NSA and for lending your voice to the show. And everyone listening, thank you for the privilege of your time. And remember, Speakernomics is a podcast where you'll learn to speak, get paid, repeat.